Nice to be here. Is the sound working? It's nice to see kids in the front row. That's great. Just to set this up, this is why we're talking about food, and this is why we're talking about our future is for the kids. And what kind of future do we want to leave for our kids here, right? So it's really great to have kids of all ages, big and small. For the next 10 minutes, I think I've been given, I'm going to talk to you about the EAT-Lancet report. I'll try and stay on time. And, we've been absolutely humbled at the headlines that we've gotten about this thing. We knew we were onto something, but it has really made an international splash. I think we've had almost 7,000 articles written about this all over the world. People are debating it. They're coming at it from both sides, positive and also negative. And like you said, Michael, I think it's creating a healthy debate. And this is exactly what we need, is we have to start talking about food. And food is one of those things we all talk about every single day. We love it. We eat it. We have conversations over it. So, of course, we all think we're experts in it. But food is also the main culprit of so many things that are causing issues all over the planet, if you're talking about health issues or if you're talking about environmental issues. And leading into that, if there's ever a time for us to panic, it's now. Things are getting worse, they're not getting better. We are in a global climate crisis. We are in a global biodiversity crisis. And I think we can't overstate just how serious the situation is and how little time we have left to solve it. And that's just the environmental side. On the health side, we have a health crisis. People are eating stuff which is not good for us. Rising rates of cancer, rising rates of type 2 diabetes, and also rising rates of deaths, all related back to food. And food is the thing that connects the health and the environment. And if there's ever a time for us to come together to solve this problem, it's now. And the great thing about food is it gives us agency. Every single one of us wants to know, what can I do to save the planet? What can I do to save tropical rainforest or orangutans or whatever it is? It's hard when you're living here to think about those abstract problems so far away. But food is something you can do today. You can go home, you can change what you eat, and you have a direct impact on the planet. So this was our goal. Our goal was, how are we going to achieve healthy diets for every single person on this planet? All 10 billion people of us by 2050. And we're not just talking about enough food, we're talking about healthy diets for every single person. That was our main goal. And doing that within the environmental limits that we have. Now, we had two tasks. One was, we have to set the scientific targets for what defines healthy diets. Now, if I was to survey the room here and ask you what a healthy diet was, I bet I'd get very different answers. Is it a vegan diet? Is it a low-carb diet? Is it a only meat diet? Are sausages good for me? How much meat should I be eating? There's so much confusion on this. We wanted to bring global clarity on what defines a healthy diet. Also, what is a sustainable food? We wanted to bring international clarity to what defines healthy, sustainable food. Is sustainable food GMO foods, organic foods, locally produced food? We wanted to say, well, if you wanted to call something healthy, sustainable, this is what it is. These are the scientific targets for it. So here's the diet. You want to know what you should go home and eat today? This is it. And I'll be curious to see this food that's served here, but I'm guessing it's probably pretty close to within this. So what we did is we said, let's look at the literature about what the literature is saying about what we should be putting into our bodies. When we developed this diet, we did not factor in the environment. We did not say, well, let's look at the Paris Climate Agreement and how much greenhouse gas emissions we actually have left, and then figure out what we should be eating, or what impacts biodiversity, and then figure out what we should be eating. We said, what will optimize our health? So if you want to decrease your risks or minimize your risks for getting nasty things like cancer, diabetes, if you want to decrease your risk of gaining weight, this is a diet that you should be following. So it's 2,500 kilocalories per day, which is a lot less than what some of us are eating and is more than what many parts of the world are eating. We divided this up into food groups: whole grains, tubers, vegetables, fruits, dairy foods, protein sources, added fats, and added sugars. Now, when you look at fruits and vegetables, you'll see it's this column right here is grams per day, and this provides the range. So what we're saying is you need 200 grams of fruits and 300 grams of veggies. 500 grams of your total diet each day should be fruits and vegetables. Essentially, a lot of your diet should be focused on the good stuff, the greens. We all know that, right? I think where the controversy comes is right here, is where should we be getting our protein sources? Do we get our protein sources from legumes, from meats, from red meats, from chickens? Where should we be getting? Remember, this diet is just focused on optimizing health. So what we're saying, and I'm just going to point out a few here, and maybe if we have questions, we can tease out some of the details. But if you're looking at beef, lamb, and pork, red meat, we're saying 14 grams per day. 100 grams per week, that's a single serving of red meat per week. I think a lot of us, when you go out and have a hamburger, it's a 200-gram hamburger in a single serving. We're saying one time per week, you can have red meat. Chicken and other poultry, about a serving and a half. Eggs, about 1.5 eggs per week. Fish, about 1.5 servings. So 4 servings of animal source foods per week. Nuts and legumes, a lot more nuts and legumes in our diet. We're not eating nearly enough of this. Once again, this is the diet to optimize your health, to decrease things like cancer and if you're looking at type 2 diabetes. Dairy foods, 250 grams per day. That's a single serving of dairy per day. Now, does this sound like not very much red meat? In many parts of the world, it is. But I think if you look back generations ago, it was not common for us to be eating as much red meat as what we're eating today. And you might be thinking, this is a radical shift from what we're used to. It's not traditional. It's not. I don't think that's true. I think in most parts of the world, how we used to eat was a single serving of red meat. If you had red meat, you maybe had it once a week. It was a treat. It's like lobster. I love eating lobster, but I don't have it every single meal. We need to start thinking about red meat in the same way. It's a treat, it's a condiment, it's a side dish, but it doesn't have to be the focus of every single meal. You see, processed foods is not on here, things like bacon, sausages, it's not on here because the link to cancers is very high. Now, pretty boring diet, right? Looks boring. No, absolutely not. Oh, actually, let's go ahead and visualize this. If you want to visualize this, what your plate should look like, half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables. A lot more whole grains, no processed grains and white breads. Whole grains is really good. We need that fiber. Not very much animal source foods, and a lot more plant proteins. This is how our plate should be looking. Boring diet? Absolutely not. This is what it looks like. You can develop so many beautiful dishes from this. You don't need meat in your diet to have beautiful, delicious food. And I think that's one of the myths. People think vegan, vegetarian food, it has to be boring. It's not very much fun. Actually, we can develop this in ways which are absolutely gorgeous. Now, the great thing about this is many parts of the world are shifting to this. If you look at Canada, 5 days after we launched this report, Canada came up with their food guide. And it looks just like this, very similar to the plate that I just showed you. They had 37 scientists independently working on what is the best thing for actually people to eat. So did we. And you can see the science is becoming pretty clear in terms of what we need to be putting into our mouths. What are we eating, though, today? Look at North America. This is a boundary that we should be sitting at right here. So what we're saying is that you should be eating up to this for all these different food groups. This is red meat. North America, we're so far over the boundary. A lot of, right here, potatoes, chickens, dairy. We're eating way too much of the bad stuff. And if you find nuts on here, you win a prize. It's right here. You can hardly see it. Nuts is so small, that wedge is teeny. And nuts is one of the greatest things that we could be eating. High in unsaturated fats and high in protein. And then you look at Africa. We're not in Africa, not enough of the good stuff, mainly focusing on tubers, cassava. It fills our belly with empty calories, but it doesn't provide the micronutrients that we need. So some parts of the world, like North America and Europe, we're eating way too much. and mainly the bad stuff. Many parts of the world, they're not eating enough, and we have to figure out how to bring those two together. Remember, the goal was healthy diets for every single person on this planet. Now, let's just look at the environmental side briefly in the last couple minutes that I have. So we said healthy diets. What are the scientific targets for that? What's the scientific targets? How do we produce this food? We have to move beyond just looking at greenhouse gas emissions. And what we said is that if we want to do this, we have to set boundaries for these 6 environmental areas. And we have to produce food in the boundaries for these 6 environmental areas. We can't just focus on climate change, we have to focus on all 6. Because if we stay within this boundary right here, but we lose on biodiversity, it doesn't matter. If we win on this one right here and only focus here, but lose on the water that we're using, it also doesn't matter. This whole system is connected. You pull on one string and it has impacts on another. So, here's the results. The results is, can we produce food for every single person on the planet and do it within those environmental limits that I just showed you? So you see some reds, some greens, some yellows up here. Reds are bad, we're over the targets. Green is we're within the targets, and yellow is pretty close. This is where we are in 2010, based on these boundaries. And what we said, let's test 3 different actions. How we produce food, the amount of food that we waste, and our diet. And test these actions against each one of these environmental limits to see if we can stay within the environmental limits for every single one. This is where we're going to be in 2050 if we don't do anything. If we throw up our hands and say, whatever, we're going to eat whatever we want because it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to tell me what I put in my mouth because this is my diet. We're going to keep on producing the food the way that we are and waste it. You can see here it's reds almost all the way across the board. We double greenhouse gas emissions, almost double land use, nitrogen, phosphorus, and biodiversity are through the roof. The only way that we start to get within the targets is as we go down the table to say, well, we need to produce the food better, we need to reduce waste by half, and we need to shift our diet. And you can see it's down here at the very bottom that we finally start to get within the environmental targets. The great message is, we can do this. It's absolutely possible. We don't need new technologies to do this. We can do it today. It's just a matter of will. The tricky thing is, we're pretty close. We don't have a lot of wiggle room. At 100 grams per day, we're good. At 300 grams per day, we're over the limits. 300 grams per day is recommended by WHO. We're recommending 100. So there's a very small wiggle room that we have. Let me finish up here with what the 5 strategies are. Number 1 is we have to seek commitment from everybody, international governments and people, to make this shift. The thing about it is we can't just rely on the individual consumer to do this. Too often it's education campaigns and it's the role of the individual, but that's not going to be enough. We need governments like what you saw with Canada that are stepping up and saying this is what people should be eating and putting the laws into place that allow that kind of food to be produced and makes it affordable so everybody can do it. So you don't have to be rich to be able to afford healthy food. Number 2, we have to stop producing. It's not just about quantity. We can produce enough calories. But like I showed you what's happening in Africa, so many of these calories are empty calories. We can't continue to cut down the rainforest of Borneo to produce Twix and Snickers and chips and things like that, empty calories. We have to start shifting to producing the right food. Now, what kind of food is this? We don't need any more cereals. We're fine with that. We don't have to focus on producing more grains. Where we have to focus on are more vegetables, more fruits, more fish, more legumes, and more nuts. And we need to reduce red meat production by 65% globally by 2050. Third strategy is we have to intensify. We're not using the land well enough. We have no more land. The land that we have for agriculture today, that's all we have. We can't cut or change any more land to produce our food. And we can do it. Fourth is we have to figure out how to govern this. And I think this might want to be strategy number one, because this might be the most important but the most tricky. How are we going to govern the forest? How are we going to govern the oceans? And the only way that we can do this is if we cooperate. Because if we're going to use all the land that we have on the planet to produce food for every single person and another 2 billion people by 2050, then we're going to have to figure out how to start working together. And as you see with politics all over the world, we're going in the opposite direction. People are working less together and not enough together. We can't just focus on locally produced food. We have to focus on every single person on this planet, where we produce it, and how we optimize the land that we have. And lastly, we're wasting way too much food. Everybody knows this. We keep on doing it in our homes and restaurants everywhere. It's not just production, it's also consumption. This is also another impact that we can have today. I'm going to leave you with a couple things in conclusion. First one is, if we take the Paris Climate Agreement seriously and the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to start taking food seriously. We will not achieve either of them if we don't start considering the food that we put into our mouths. Now, the food that we put into our mouths will not save the planet, but we can't save the planet if we don't start changing the food that we put into our mouths. So it's not the only solution. It won't fix all the problems, but we have to start doing it. And the second is, starting out with the kids, what type of world do we want to leave? Do we want to leave a world of where orangutans and gorgeous tigers still exist? And the only chance that we have of doing that is fixing our food system. Food is the main culprit of so many things. So I will leave it at that, and I look forward to questions. Thank you.